Hello everyone, it's been a while. It's Song from iFrame Games. You might be wondering what I've been doing all this time since my last video. Well, I actually released my first game called Rocket Recoil. I actually have the trailer on the channel, so if you want to go check it out, feel free to. Anyway, the premise of the game is that it is a rage game where you have to use the power of rockets to move around. It's currently on Steam for about $5, and I'm going to try to probably create a video of me speedrunning it. Probably going to be the first one, world record, just considering all that, but, But for this video, I actually wanted to take the time to explain the process of how I made Rocket Recoil. And unfortunately, I didn't really do any kind of dev vlogs during the creation of this game, so let's just kind of go through, like, my mentality, what I was thinking about, and just kind of cover that kind of stuff. So let's get started. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was the coding behind the game. When I first started this project, I started on the concept, which was, of course, a physics-based rocket jumping game. I really liked using Godot for my 2D projects, so, of course, I made the working project using Godot. I messed around trying to use the kinematic bodies inside of Godot, but there wasn't a really good way to simulate physics with the kinematic bodies because, if you guys don't know, kinematic bodies are more designed to just move in the direction that you tell it to. It doesn't really do that well with, having forces applied to it. So, because of that, I used a rigid body instead. Now, because Godot has a rigid body that has all the physics built into it, all I had to do was just write code that uses the impulse function that's inside the rigid body. Once I got working on that, I moved on to creating the rocket and having it explode on impact with tile maps. Now, the rockets work by having a collision shape that detects for a tile map, and then it has an area 2D collision that checks to see if the player is within the range when the rocket touches a tile map. Now, if an area 2D detects a player, the area 2D is going to access the player node and use the impulse function that we talked about in the previous section. Now, the nice thing about the impulse function is that it has built-in arguments, things like offset, direction, power, so it made it really easy to just basically set the offset for the player, apply the direction, and then have the power, which of course, if you guys want me to talk about how to actually have that work inside of your game, we can definitely go into the code. One of the problems I ran into was the rocket would spawn but not detect the tile maps up close to the player. This is because the detect body enter signal doesn't check during the initial frame of spawn in, and by the time the signal is ready for processing, the rocket already sped past the tile map collision shape. There was probably a way to have the signal ready during the frame of spawning, but I kind of suck at coding, so I just made a raycast that was connected to the rocket launcher, and it would just detect to see if a tile map is close to the player, and instead of spawning a rocket, it would just create an explosion at the raycast intersection. I also spent a good time actually making a good explosion sprite animation because the majority of the game is going to be spent looking at the explosions. Now, the majority of the art assets used in Rocket Recoil was actually, I bought it in a Humble Bundle pack for 2D art assets. I have the art assets listed in the credits. I don't remember off the top of my head what the name is, but the rocket explosion was actually created using Metal Slug as a reference. If you guys never played Metal Slug, I would highly recommend it. In my opinion, SNK's pixel art is some of the best pixel art that you can look at, and of course, Metal Slug had some of the best explosion animations ever created. It's still used. If you see any kind of sprite-based animations, I don't know if they're still made, but I watched a lot of MapleStory sprite animation when I was younger. They all use Metal Slug animation, so it's very good. Now, one of the things that I actually ran into that I had to try to figure out a solution for was whether or not to have a level-based system or just have a continuous level. Now, the reason I was having this kind of problem was because the background wasn't able to extend all the way to the top without having some kind of issues with the parallaxing. Now, of course, I did actually make a solution where the player would switch between levels, and there was a global script that would keep all the variables of the player that would be needed, so things like velocity, rotation, that kind of stuff, and it would just basically carry over from scene to scene. Now, instead of doing all that work, I just decided to embrace the kit bash nature of the game and just have the backgrounds overlapping with each other. Of course, one of the big inspirations for this game was Getting Over It, which is also a kit bash game. So honestly, it just kind of worked out. And another big side effect of doing this was now I could actually have an unlocked camera view for the players, which I should probably go in and have the unlocked view be the default, because it makes playing the game way easier, but if you don't check the settings, you know what, it's on you. Now, after I got all that kind of work done, now it was just basically developing and testing the level. So, for testing the level, I made a quick debugging mode. The first version actually just teleported the player to where the mouse position was, which ended with a lot of problems where, like, the player would, like, fly completely off the map. Like, there was no way that I could, like, realistically get back. So instead of doing that, I just had it so the player would, like, slowly accelerate to the mouse position using linear interpolation, which worked out much easier. So if you guys are trying to do, like, debugging modes for a game very similar, just do that. The mindset that I had for each level was to have a different gimmick that didn't introduce a new mechanic. Now, that kind of sounds weird at first, but let me try to explain what I mean by this. So the first level was, of course, to introduce the player to moving around, just having them kind of explore using the rockets to move, and of course, kind of experimenting, having the rocket shoot a little bit further away to kind of like move the player along during the platforms. And of course, the second level was to introduce the wall jumping mechanic, which is actually a result of the physics engine that's just inherent to it. So that's kind of what I mean by not introducing a new gimmick. So it basically, the player could always do a wall jump, but the level wasn't designed to let them wall jump yet. So that's kind of the mindset that I had with all of the levels until final level. So with the third level, it was mainly about having the player kind of squeeze between small gaps and then having to shoot or jump off of floors that are a little bit uneven, which could, you know, cause the player to kind of move in a way that the player didn't expect for them to move. And then the fourth level was all about having the player continuously shoot because they're on a slope. So because of the slope, the player will roll down so the player can't stop shooting rockets, otherwise they're going to lose their progress. And then the fifth level was a combination of the fourth level with the slopes, and then a wall jumping mechanic that was brought in from level 2. And then the sixth level was having the player wall jump around a middle pillar, so they kind of had to do a upside down U maneuver to get around. I don't think it was particularly well executed, but of course there were also some exploits that I figured out a little bit later where you can bypass the majority of it, so I'll probably do that in my speed run when I get around to it. And then the final level, I already kind of alluded to this, I did introduce a new gimmick inside the final level. It's a reference to MapleStory and the jump quests inside of MapleStory. If you guys have played MapleStory and the jump quests, you know that in Sleepywood there are some moving spikes, spiky balls particularly, that knock you off and can cause you to have some problems. Unfortunately, in my game, you don't have damage, so instead what it does is it just pushes you off, which you can actually take advantage of. I was maybe thinking about having the spiky balls actually shoot you up, which that might be something I'll kind of get into with the updates, but we'll see. After I got finished with the level, the rest of the time was honestly just learning how to create a save system and a system setting configuration file. So a lot of this was pretty new to me because a lot of my projects really are just me creating a demo. There's no like way to continue your progress, so it was pretty interesting having to actually learn how to do this stuff. And for anyone who wants to like know how I did it, GD Quest has a great video about using, I believe it is like, it's not a save file per se, it's just something built into Godot's system where you can kind of save a lot of the information of the player, but it was very useful in creating a save system. I'll probably use this same thing moving forward. It is something that I think is pretty useful. If you want me to get into it, I can. But and then, of course, making the UI. I really don't make UIs. I don't make any kind of working UIs in my games. It's literally just quit and play. So having to work with that was kind of annoying, but it is great to actually know how to do it. And for my next game, I'm definitely going to have a theme that is centered around the entire game for the UI. So hopefully you guys can look forward to actually having a unified theme for the UI. And then uploading to Steam. Honestly, uploading to Steam made me really hate having to put in tax information. It was a headache to actually do that. It was very annoying. And of course, I didn't realize how many art assets you actually need to create to put a game on Steam. So you actually have to do like capsule art, background art, a lot of kind of art. So if you guys have never uploaded a game to Steam, just keep in mind out that you will have to do some of that art asset work after you actually put your project up and, you know, it gets approved and all that great stuff. Now, moving forward, I actually want to update this game, creating individual challenge levels. So one of the things that I found very hard designing levels about the game was that the player can't be put into a fail state because the player has to be able to continue from the failure point. It's kind of weird, but basically I can't put the player into a pit that kills them because my game wasn't designed around having the player die. So in this individual level format, I think I can have a little bit more unique level scenarios where if the player fails to accomplish something, instead of, you know, them just falling backwards, I'll actually have them like reset at the beginning, which is very nice. I already kind of worked on it a little bit. I have a timer built in, and of course some, you know, best time and all that great stuff. But this entire process, it took me about 2 years, but the bulk of the work that I actually put into this game was done in the last few months, because I got the project working in the conceptual state, but I didn't really expand it out that much until about a few months ago. But if you guys have any questions about any specifics of this project, if you guys want to leave them in the comments, I'll definitely clarify it in the comments, or I can make a video if the topic is a little bit complicated. But for my next project, I'll be creating a psychological horror game named The Muted Mountain, obviously. It's a play on Silent Hill. I'm probably going to actually do devlogs for that, so you guys can see the entire process of creating the art assets, creating, you know, a rig, all that great stuff, so you guys can see the full process of how I did a lot of this stuff, you know, beginning to end. But thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you learned a little bit more about the whole process of actually creating an indie game. I really wouldn't call myself an indie game developer. It is just something I wanted to do. It was honestly a great experience, and of course I want to keep being able to do this, maybe not as a full-time thing, because it doesn't pay me that well right now, but you know, if I get some success, I would definitely love to be able to continuously do this.